Good evening. Welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring women-owned businesses from across the country. And now, for your host, Kimberly Macklemore.
All right, good evening and welcome to WSBI, your Resource for Success podcast program where you get to meet inspiring entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses from across the country. I am your host, Kimberly Macklemore, and welcome to a special edition of tonight's show. With us, we have Richard Matthews. The business he started in 2009 has morphed into Matthews Enterprises, a consulting service that helps authors, coaches, consultants, and service professionals grow their businesses, establish expert credibility, and make a ton of sales using online courses, webinars, and automations. Over the last 10 years, Richard and his clients have sold over $200,000 worth of online courses and coaching. He is also a speaker, a consultant, author, and inventor whose work has impacted some of the top expert brands across the country. He specializes in helping businesses automate their marketing, build their offers, master their technology, and design their instruction in ways that create success stories that snowball the business's growth. So without further ado, please help me welcome to my platform, Mr. Richard Matthews. How are you, Richard? How are you doing this evening?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've had such a pleasure talking to you prior to the show, so I can't wait to share some of that now that we're actually started the show. But before we dive into the actual interview, Richard, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about who Richard Matthews is?
Yeah, so I am probably the biggest parts of my life. I'm a husband and a father. I've got 4 kids that are, between 2 years old and 11. I got 3 girls and an older boy. And spend a great deal of my time with them. We travel full time in a 40-foot RV. We've been on the road for 4 years. Our 4th child was actually born on the road in Texas as we were traveling around the country. I've been running my business from the road during that time, and we've actually, while traveling, increased the size of our business and the number of staff that we have, the number of clients that we serve by 4 times in the last 4 years, which is pretty cool. Wow. And so that's sort of who I am and what we do. I have 2 major markets that we serve. One of them, which you mentioned, Matthews Enterprises, we've actually that business. We serve and work with entrepreneurs, and we help them build what I call heroic brands. Right. And I actually have a podcast I call The Hero Show, where we interview guests like you do, and we talk through their story as if they were comic book superheroes, working to sort of change the cultural perception that entrepreneurs are the villains, when in fact entrepreneurs are what make the world go round. They're the unsung heroes that everything we touch and interact with on a daily basis was at some point handled by an entrepreneur. So what we do in that business is we help entrepreneurs build a heroic brand and build their courses, their training material, their brand, and their platform. Mm-hmm. So like your podcast, stuff like that. And we just started a new brand this last year, which is sort of an outgrowth of that, and that's called Push Button Podcast. And it came out of a problem that we were seeing with our clients. Is they would get everything built, they'd get their funnels built, and they'd get their training materials and their masterminds and all the stuff they need to run their business going, and then they'd get to the part where they need to build their platform, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the advertising and going on the podcast tours and building their own weekly show and stuff like that, and realized it was a lot of work for them to do that. So the ones that did would be really successful, and some of our clients wouldn't actually do the work for that. So we built Push Button Podcasts, which is a podcasting agency that actually, what we do is we handle everything for our clients white glove. So they just show up, record their content like you're doing here, push the start record and the stop record button, and then we take over from there, and we do the audio and video editing, we do the transcriptions, we do the notes, and we do the mm-hmm. derivative content for all the social media, all the promotions, advertising, and everything they need to build a content marketing machine that drives attention, awareness, authority, and leads and sales for their business. So that's our newest brand with Push Button Podcasts. And that's, in a nutshell, that's everything we do.
Yeah, you're right. You just told me everything all in less than 5 minutes. So we are going to backtrack all the way to the beginning, because I really wanted to first talk about, your family and how you are on the road, and you said you've traveled, because when we got on, before we came on, you told me that you've been traveling for the last 4 years. And I'm sitting here like, wow, that is pretty cool to be able to run your business full time, have your family with you full time, and then you're actually in an RV. So I want to talk about this experience of you and your family, in the RV, and how this is all working for you. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and it's something we've been doing for a lot of years. We had some opportunities all sort of lined up for us a few years ago where we could take our business on the road and do a lot of the things that people dream about doing, right? The reason we get into business is to have that freedom, right? And I call it the 5 freedoms. 5 freedoms being spiritual freedom, political freedom, financial freedom, time freedom, and location freedom. And once you hit some basic numbers with your financial freedom, you can start using some of that freedom to leverage your location freedom and your time freedom. We figured we could do that, and their technology's gotten to a point where we can run our businesses virtually, and then the whole world sort of got a picture of that last year with our pandemic. And so we've been doing that for 4 years now, and we've been working on growing our business, and there's been a lot of really interesting stuff that we've gotten to do. We've traveled to 26 or 27 states so far in that time. We were supposed to go up the East Coast last year, but instead we got stuck in Florida and had a pandemic instead. So we're going up the East Coast this year. So we'll get like most of the rest of the country taken care of this year, going up there. And it's it's an interesting thing to travel and run your business, because you're always in cool places and wanting to to see cool things and whatnot. So you have to really make sure the work you're doing in your business is the important work, because you don't want to just work all day, right? You don't want to spend all your time working when you are, sitting outside of Yosemite, or on the coast in the Keys, or in our case, this next month we're going to be going up to DC, and we want to go see all the museums and the statues and whatnot with our kids. So you have to make sure that you show up at work to do your work for your business, and you get the stuff done that's important. Because you don't want to waste time that you could be going to visit and see the world, which is part of the reason we travel.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, that's a pretty good gig. Okay, I think everybody listening right now is saying, "Wow, why didn't I think of that first?" I'm sure you're not the first person who's ever thought about it, but it's the way you, like you said, how you handle it. You've been able to build so you can have the freedoms that you're doing, so that your family can experience the things that most people have never experienced in a lifetime. And the thing that I love and I'm hearing is that even with the kids, I'm sure that your kids are homeschooled, and so they have that ability to be able to have those experiences that they might have even never thought about. And, even if, as an adult or becoming an adult, but you're giving them that so that they can look at the world in a different way. And even also listening to you about, the work ethic. And I think that's what I'm hearing the most out of it. It's not so much about how many hours that you're spending, but it's the quality that you bring to the table in order to have the lifestyle that you're able to live. And that's an important part of business, because I think a lot of times, as we all know, when we first start out in business, that we are killing ourselves to the point where, you want to make it, but then you don't know whether you're actually bringing out good quality, because you're trying to overperform to get that information out there, to do the things that you're doing. So talk a little bit to me about the consulting services that you have. You do focus on authors and coaches and other consultants. So kind of give me a step-by-step on your process of what you do with these people in business.
Yeah. So I have a process that I walk people through. And, I mentioned, it all sort of fits in the theme of the hero show, and that idea that entrepreneurs are heroes. And my hero name, if you would call it that, right? So you got Superman and Clark Kent kind of thing. My Superman name, if my real name is Richard, then my Superman name is The Alchemist. And that's what that's what I go by in my little my branding world there. And The Alchemist is this idea. It's always sort of fascinated me about marketing in particular, is that modern day marketing is kind of like the alchemy of old, that if you master it, you can learn to turn your words into gold, right? And that's one of the things that's always really fascinated me. If you put if you put your words and your training and your teaching and your sales material together, like in the right order and present them to the right people, you can legitimately change their lives for the better, right? You can improve other people's lives. And so what I teach is I have a formula I teach called the alchemy formula, the digital alchemy formula. And it's a 7-step process that I walk my clients through that teaches them how to build a virtual business, right? How to build in what I call a heroic brand, right? That's where you're doing something in the education space, generally speaking. So you're teaching someone how to achieve a goal or accomplish a thing in their life, and that can be anywhere from offering courses to doing coaching to doing consulting to doing done-for-you services, right? So that would even include like our Push Button podcast, which is a full white glove service brand. Those are all sort of, done-for-you services, but they all sort of fit in that world of needing to build a heroic brand and build the content and whatnot. So I'm not sure how in depth you want to go, but we could talk a lot about that whole the alchemy formula and what that looks like, and like the pieces that are needed to build a business, because they're pretty much all the same for the business, and it's just a matter of putting them together in the right order and making sure that you're doing the same things.
So like you say, you have a process. So that 7-step process you utilize with all of your clientele to get them going, and that's something they consistently do throughout the whole tenure of their business that they're in, or is that how that works?
So the whole goal is my goal is to help someone build a business that drives the revenue they're looking for and drives the impact that they're looking for, while not taking a tremendous amount of time to run, right? So the 7 steps, the alchemy is acknowledge your effect, right? And acknowledging your effect is if just like Robert Parr from The Incredibles, everyone has a superpower, right? It's skills and abilities, and more importantly, perspective that you've gained over the course of your life and your experiences that you can use to help solve this world's problems, right? You can slay the world's villains or your client's villains, so to speak. You can make an impact, right? And so that's the first step, is learning how to acknowledge the effect that you have, right? And build your brand's fundamentals, right? And help you pinpoint your tribe and create a profitable brand that will actually help people, right? And so that's the first step, is acknowledging your effect.
Right.
The second step is learning how to leverage your models, right? That's the L in alchemy. And that's the power that comes with a heroic brand, is being able to have leverage, right? So the simplest explanation basically is that people don't buy content in a content business, right? What they buy is they buy intimacy. So with that in mind, what we help people do is we help them develop a virtual business empire that leverages your time to serve the most people at the highest level possible, by using what I call a sliding scale of intimacy in your product stack, right? And our goal is really to help build an educational brand that helps you bring in cash flow and get your clients results, right? Okay. So you want to do both of those things. You want to bring in cash flow to you while getting your clients results, and keeping your time investment in that as small as possible. So the model is like learning how to build different levels of intimacy. And like if you think about it, we mentioned this earlier, right? You have simple products and courses, you might have flagship courses, and then you might have group coaching or individual coaching and done for you services. And each one of those things is a higher level of intimacy. And the higher you go up that intimacy scale, the higher the cost goes, but also the shorter the time frame to get your client results generally is.
Right. Okay.
So that's the model. And I teach people how to use that leverage model in their business. So that's the second step. I don't know if you want to keep going through those or talk about any of them as we're going.
Yeah. We could just talk about maybe one more, because I definitely have a question I wanted to ask after. So go ahead and give us one more example. So the next letter. So
the third one is C, create your assets, right? And so every heroic brand needs to have assets, right? And those are all the things that actually make you look like a real, reputable online brand, right? That's worthy of spending their hard-earned dollars with. So you need to build like your communications channels, your sales channels, your delivery stuff. So that's like where they're actually going to get their products and services with you, your marketing materials, and any of the automations on the back end that sort of make everything happen. And you want to have all of that look like you are one of the big dogs, right? Because when we're done with all of this, hopefully you will be one of the big dogs. And we want to build them in such a way that your brand is sending what I call the unconscious trust signals to your buyers that you are as legit as they come, right? And there's a lot of things that go into doing that, but it's just a matter of, knowing how to consistently use your brand's colors, how to consistently use your brand's typography, how to consistently use your brand's imagery, and how to consistently use your brand's words, so that you're sending all those unconscious trust signals that we are a professional outfit, we are real, we're legitimate, and if you, no matter where you see us or how you interact with us, whether it's before you buy or after you buy, you have that consistent brand that's through all of your brand's assets, right? So then we start talking about how you do that. So that's the C in creating your assets. Right. So the first 3 steps there, again, acknowledge your impact or acknowledge your effect, leverage your model, and create your assets.
All right. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, it sounds really good. And then you talked about earlier how you've been doing this for 4 years. You were doing virtual before most people even wanted to really be involved with virtual. And you said that you have increased incredibly within the last few years. So talk about how this has really affected you in 2020, because, most people were pretty much brought to their knees. They didn't know what to do with themselves. And then all of a sudden, everybody was forced into this world of virtuality. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So I've been running this business, the building heroic brands, started all the way back in 2009. So going on 11 years, and was building that, out of my own home office and working with everything from local brands to other things, over the course of a number of years. And then it was, 2017, I think, is when we decided to move on the road, because I realized we'd just gotten to a point where all of my meetings were happening over the phone, and they were happening over, I can't remember what service we were using at the time. It wasn't Zoom, because Zoom wasn't out yet.
Right.
But it was something similar. It was a competitor to Zoom, probably, things like Skype and other things that most of our businesses were running off of that way. And we had, I had started doing like weird tests with my wife. I was like, hey, we've been talking about this traveling thing. Maybe we can travel and run this business. So we started doing things like, hey, on Fridays, instead of working in the office, we're going to go down to Balboa Park in San Diego, and you can take the kids to the zoo and I'll work out in the park. See if we could do that. Right. And then maybe, on a Wednesday afternoon, instead of working in the office, we'll go down to the beach and see if I can work from the beach and see what we can do and accomplish in, just weird places. And so we were practicing this idea of like, what does it look like to not have to work in your office all the time? And so I realized that I could do that, right? I could work outside of an office, which was a weird thing for me, right? Because I'd always had my home office and always worked from my home office. And so when we finally moved onto the road, I built a little mobile office in the back of my RV, right? And, we're on our second RV now, but in this bigger RV that we have now, I've got I call it my mobile command studio, and I've got, a big monitor, and I've got a camera and a light system and a backdrop and like I've recorded 160 episodes of our podcast in the back of this, in the back room of this RV, which is cool. So we've been doing the whole virtual thing for a while, and then 2020 hit, right? And so our business was growing, which is fine and all good, and like that's what we want to have happen. And then 2020 hit, and just like everyone else, all of my clients, they're all like, everyone puts the brakes on.
Right. That's right.
And they're like, because nobody knows what's happening. So everything sort of stopped for a month or two. I had a few clients like, hey, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to keep going because nobody knows what's happening. So everything sort of paused for a little while. And I had a couple of clients that I convinced to stick around while we could keep stuff going and grow things. And then what happened pretty quickly is that, I realized I still had staff that I had to, I had salaries to pay and other things. So we had to grow still. So we put together a training course on, things you could do during the pandemic, like, working on your business systems, and got some attention there. And then quickly realized that everyone was like, the world has shifted. Right. And now having a virtual business wasn't just a nice thing to have. It was going to be a requirement moving forward. And everything started to pick back up again. Right. And it's only getting better now as more and more people are starting to realize that, hey, what we've been doing ourselves, right, we've been living this life, and what we're teaching others how to do is where we were ahead of the curve, if that makes sense.
You're right.
And
exactly.
So so it's starting to pick up, and I think it's only going to continue to grow over the next couple of years, because the virtual business model is really the model of the future. And so it's, what's been happening since 2020 is we've been growing more.
Right. And you're right.
And we still had to shift some of our stuff and shift some of our marketing and shift some of how we're talking about it because, the world changed. And now we're not just talking to people who are already thinking about virtual, but we're having to talk to people who had never considered virtual and how their business might look that way. Right. So I've got one of my clients is in the healthcare space and we're working on a program to teach doctors and chiropractors and physical therapists and such like that how to run their business virtually, right? And he's been running his chiropractic office virtually for many years, and so we're just taking some of the stuff that I know and some of the stuff that he knows and applying it to an industry that's not used to working virtually.
Right.
And so there's a lot of different and new opportunities to be had in lots of different spaces. So it's expanded our marketplace considerably, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and even when you're talking about the medical side, I mean, telehealth have been coming out slowly, but then now it's like you said, everybody's been pushed to having to do the things that they weren't used to doing. And what is your thoughts about this being continual, not just within a year or so, or do you recommend to your businesses that are coming to you that even when things get back to so-called normal, do you recommend that they continue to stay on this path versus going back to the brick and mortar type scenario?
So there are a lot of things that are happening all at once right now that is bigger than just our pandemic. So if you look at, we've got the pandemic that's changed a lot of the world in terms of how we interact with one another. Right. But that's just one small piece of the big changes. So if you look at things like the introduction of 5G internet technology is going to rapidly change the speed that we have to interact with one another. And that's one piece. And then you have energy technology, right? You have things like the batteries that Tesla's working on and fourth generation nuclear technology, where they're talking about things like being able to have a nuclear reactor that has no, what's the word that I'm looking for? It has no bad things that come out of it, and it's the size of a refrigerator, and it can power an entire town the size of like Los Angeles. Wow. Right. And that kind of technology is like power technology is going to change the world. But you go a couple generations past that, and now you're talking about battery, like the battery you put in your cell phone will outlast your phone. The first charge that you get it, right, will last 4 or 5 years. The battery, the single charge on your battery will last longer than the phone does. Wow. Right. And that's, we're getting to the point in the next couple of years, we will have what is essentially unlimited energy. Right. So if you combine that together with, 4G, and you get into the AR and VR tech, and you get into the some of the health sciences and stuff that's coming out, and you put all those things together, we are looking at virtual business and some of the things that are happening on blockchain with what they're calling non-fungible assets and digital asset stuff, that the virtual business and the stuff that's happening is just going to rapidly change. So less of the, are we going to go back to normal, to that world that we were looking at seeing in maybe the next 10 to 15 years is probably going to rapidly show up in the next 3 or 4. Yes. So I think it's more of you're never going to see the world pre-2020 again. Right. So you either are going to learn how these technologies work and how your business is going to operate within the new paradigm, or you're going to get left behind.
Right. And a lot of them are already left behind. Like I said, and everybody's trying to play catch up because the world was so used to, I've got to be in front of you. Everything had to be face to face per se, but it had to be the physical aspect versus you doing it virtually now. And as we talked earlier, things are definitely, changing over. And even when it comes into the podcasting, and now we have all these other options to do your podcasting, with the new program that's out there we were talking about earlier, and I'm not going to mention on the show right now, but there's just so many different ways that you can build and catapult your business in ways that you could not have done personally, because it's, first of all, the cost of it is almost too much for the average person to do when you're trying to reach out to people that at a global level or just even in a local level. It's hard to gauge these people when you're trying to do it on your own. So now that we have this virtual aspect, for those, like you said, who aren't in it and won't be a part of it, you will be completely behind. You're actually behind the curve now. If you haven't jumped on
you're
board,
already behind the curve.
Yeah, you're already behind the curve because everybody's doing this. We don't have a choice, even in your jobs. For those who don't like working from home, this may be the only choice that you have, but this is a good thing to some degree because I like the fact that, like you've been talking earlier, that you get more time with yourself and your family, and you can actually plan your day without feeling like you have to be stuck in an environment for 10 to 12 hours a day in order to get something accomplished. And so we're realizing that the world has changed and that what we're doing, you don't need to have that much time to get something done. We've all learned that
you don't need to be in a big city, and you don't need to be in a big office.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And you don't even need to be in a permanent office, right? Because I've proven that with my own business. You can be anywhere. And to that point, I have just a story I want to share that I think might be really helpful for your audience in terms of learning how to pick the most important things to do in your business and reducing the amount of time that you spend, right? So right now, my business is 4 times bigger than it was 4 years ago when we got on the road, right? And the amount of time I spent in my business 4 years ago was anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day,
right?
5 to 6 days a week. And today, with a business that's 4 times the size, my average work day is 4 hours, and I work on average of 4 days a week, right? So that's drastically different. And the way that happened was a sort of an experiment that I started running on myself. That I learned from a psychology book that was talking about children and how creativity thrives with boundaries, right? And so they did this experiment where they put children out onto a back playground where they have the concrete pad and then they had the grass all the way around, and then the grassy field is surrounded by the roads. Right? And they would let the kids out for recess with no fences up anywhere and see what they would do. And without any fences, the kids would stay on the concrete pad. They would never explore any of the grassy area. And then they went up and they put a fence all the way around the grass area between the grass and the road. And they let all the kids out again, and they would play not only on the concrete pad, but all the way through the grass field. Because when you give the children boundaries, their creativity thrives, right? And that sort of applies to a lot of things in our lives, in our business, in our own ability. Like even if you think of things like photography is really, it's the art of having a boundary, right? You have this 4x3 frame you're looking through. What am I going to include in that frame?
Right.
So creativity thrives with boundaries. So I started thinking, can I apply that to the work that I'm doing? Right. And can I make my own creativity thrive by giving myself, essentially artificial barriers, right? Artificial, restrictions. And so I was like, if I'm spending 12 hours a day, 6 days a week working, what happens if I restrict that to 8 hours a day? Right. And you start to change what you're working on because you're like, hey, I'm not going to let myself work more than 8 hours today. Right. Which is the thing that entrepreneurs are very apt to do, is just work all the time forever and never stop because we don't have a time clock to punch in and out of. So what if I give myself an artificial 8 hours a day? And, what if that worked and I started making more money and started getting better things done? What if I cut that to, 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week? And, my business grew and I started doing better work. And then, what if we go to 6 hours a day? And then what if, it's gotten down to the point where I mentioned where we are now. And really what happens over the time as you start giving yourself those restrictions, you realize you force yourself to focus on doing the work that is important and urgent in your business to get the next step down, to hit your next goals, and realize that if it's taking a lot of time, you have to build the systems that make that happen for you. You have to hire the right people. You have to make those growth decisions because you've given yourself these boundaries that you have to operate within. And it helps you really grow your business that way.
Well, yeah. And then, it's a mindset change is really what it boils down to. I mean, because, in the world of the working world, I remember hearing the saying back in the day, well, you have to be the first person in and the last person to go if you want to make it. And I'm like, wait a minute now, so, you're going to work me to death and it's going to take me years in order to get to that point. So it's like you said, where does that stop? Where do we learn to value what we have and what we're doing? And how do we make that work to where we're not killing ourselves in order to be successful. And, the way that you're describing it is exactly the world that 90% of us want to be in. It's just, how do you get there? And here you have a formula to help people get there. So for those, though, who are very new at this and they're coming into business and then say that they don't have the income that they need to have, how do you help them overcome that process in order to get to utilize a 7-step program that you have?
So generally speaking, most of our clientele has something that they're operating already, that they're getting results with, and they want to add an educational wing to it. So most of our individual clients they have some sort of, they're in real estate and they're wanting to take what they're doing in real estate and teach others, or they're in, I got a chiropractor who wanted to teach other chiropractors how to do the virtual practice that he's doing, or we've got, any number of things where they have a successful business and they're wanting to add the educational wing to it. If you want to start from scratch building that educational stuff, the first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that what you have, right, is a skill set that gets someone a result that they're willing to pay for, right? So if you think about the building blocks of business are really 3 things. You need to have a group of people who have a problem they're willing to spend money to solve, right? That's first set, is you have to have a group of people with a problem they're willing to spend money to solve. And then you need to have, the second part of that is you need to have a unique solution to that problem, right? And that's where something that you've developed or you've got experience with, or you've helped people with before, or maybe you're developing it for the first time, but that's where the unique product or service comes in, is developing that to solve that. And then the third part of business is you have to connect those 2 things together, right? So you have to take that audience and your solution, you have to get your solution in front of that audience. That's where building your platform and doing your marketing and sales is going to connect those 2 things together. And that's, it doesn't really matter what business you're in. Right? Could be selling used cars, or in our case, selling educational materials. Every business has those 3 components, right? Group of people with a problem they're willing to spend money to solve, a unique solution to it, and some sort of messaging strategy, right, with marketing and sales to get that solution in front of that group of people. So my advice to someone who's brand new, who might be in maybe as a job or is looking to start a business, is you have to figure out those 3 aspects of your business, right? What is the group of people that you can help, right? Do they have a problem, and are they willing to spend money to solve that problem? And that can be as simple as maybe talking to a few friends or colleagues or people who have that problem and saying, hey, I'm working on this unique solution to that. Would you be willing to beta test with me, right? And you can, maybe get a couple of people to test out your theories or your training material or your service. Right, I actually do that. That's how we developed our push button podcast service. Is I had some clients that are like, I can't do all of this work that you said I should do for building my podcast platform. And I turned around and said, how about we do it for you? I don't have this service built yet, but are you willing to be a guinea pig for me? Here's what I think it's going to cost us in terms of labor. I don't know how this is going to go, but here's a plan that I have, and here's what I think we can do to turn this into a service. If you're willing to cover my costs for it, we can develop this together, and I can get a lot of feedback from you, and we can develop that service. And it actually turned out to be a really successful service for us. But I used 3 of my existing clients as guinea pigs, and I told them up front, this is a service I'd like to develop. I know you said you had this problem. I think we can develop a solution to it, right? So a group of people with money, problem, and I'm like, I think we can develop a solution. Let's come together. That's the whole marketing message thing. And if you don't have the experience yet, you can go to people and maybe beta test them and develop a service or something like that. And that's where I recommend people start if you're new to this, is to take that kind of approach where you're going to develop something with someone else, sort of as a beta test partnership. And it gets you a couple of things. It gets you direct feedback. It gets you willingness in the marketplace, where they're showing you that, yes, I would be willing to spend a little bit of money, put a little bit of skin in the game to maybe help cover your costs to develop this. So you get feedback, and then once you actually succeed with them, which if you do a good job, you should absolutely succeed, unless you have a terrible idea, which of course does happen. But you'll find out quickly, right? You'll find out quickly that it's a bad idea, and you can shift and pivot because you'll have the direct feedback. But what you do is you get that developed. You have your first couple of testimonials and case studies right off the bat to start going to market with. So it works really well. So hopefully does that make sense for
It
an
does.
answer to that question?
It does. I wanted to ask it because, I have so many people who listen that are new. They either want to aspire to be a business owner, or they're very new and they're existing and still trying to figure their way around in the business, because we all know that we go through that process of readjusting. What's most important? Mm-hmm. Why am I doing this? Why am I not doing this? Why is this not working? So I really wanted to hear, how would you break that down? Because like you said, your focus is normally working with people who truly are already established and they're trying to now get to those next levels, but they want to do it in a format to where it's not killing them in order to get there.
Yeah, they want to go from being they've got something successful, so they want to take it big. Like that's where we come in and help.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's excellent information, and I definitely appreciate you sharing that with my listeners. So we're getting close to the end of the show, but I wanted to ask you one more question about what are the books that you've read, because you're an author. So tell me about one of your books.
So I have a couple of I have one book that is published and a few that are almost published. I have an older book that I wrote a number of years ago called Why Your Website Annoys the Hell Out of People. And I wrote that book back in, I don't know, maybe 2012 or 13. And I wrote that book specifically as a way to get in front of potential clients at the time. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a book that was meant to be read. It was a book meant to, in my case, be like, hey, I've actually written a book on this subject. So I went into client meetings with someone. I could put a book on the table and be like, hey, I actually talked about this here in this chapter. I used it that way. I actually used that book to close $100,000 plus a year deal.
Wow.
With stuff. So that's what that was for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I closed several deals because I wrote a book. I had a book on the subject, and I've got a few others that I am in the process of finishing. I've got one on the history of money, which is just because I am incredibly fascinated with money and how it works and how we use it, and everything from fractional reserve banking to the global currency reset that we're currently looking at, and I go through the 7 stages of money and history stuff. I'm about 3/4 of the way done with that. I just got to finish the editing on it, and that'll be published. And I have another book that I don't know if I think it's actually finished, but I'm not sure if it's up anywhere. But it's on how to do sales webinars. So we have a process called the SELL framework that teaches people, in the Alchemy framework, the H in that is like how to hook your audience. And we actually have a whole section that talks about the SELL framework and how you actually use sales presentations to teach people. And so I've got a book that walks through that. And then I've got another book that I believe is on Amazon somewhere that is called How to Become Unbeatable. Okay. And that one is about, what is that one about? That one's for local businesses, and it's about, it's a math book, really. When it really comes down to it, it's about conversion optimization and how you can stack things like a 10% improvement in response rate on your ads, and a 10% increase in like close rate with your salespeople, right? And you take 4 or 5 of those 10% improvements in small areas, and when you add those together down a sales funnel, it turns into 200 and 300 and 400% increases in overall revenue for your business. And it just goes through some of the basics on how you pay attention to small areas of growth and get big wins out of them, right? So what are the small levers you have in your business that can make big swings?
Okay. Well, you have definitely proven to us tonight your expert credibility. Okay. It has just been amazing to, hear how you have taken your business and have pivoted from one perspective to another, and it's all come together and it works really well, and that you've been able to share that in as a part of your business for others to be successful as well. So we definitely appreciate you coming on the show tonight. But before you go, could you please tell my listeners how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so best way to get hold of me is on my website, which is richardmatthews.me, and that's the website where we talk about building heroic brands and that kind of stuff. And so our podcast is also hosted there. So if you either know someone who has a good entrepreneurial story or whatnot, it could be a good guest on our show. That's all up there on the richardmatthews.me. And then the other one is our Push Button podcast agency. So if you are in that space where you are looking to grow your own platform, or you've already started growing your own platform and you really want to take that to the next level, that's where Push Button Podcasts can come in and really help you and turn that into we can turn that into a powerhouse for you and really grow your audience and grow your platform and grow all of that for you without you having to lift a finger other than to show up and record your content on a regular basis. So either of those two places, richardmatthews.me or pushbuttonpodcasts.com, are the best places to reach out to me.
All right. Well, my listeners, you have heard it all. Mr. Matthews has definitely gave us a lot of amazing golden nuggets tonight. So before you go, do you have any last words that you would like to say to my listeners this evening?
Yeah, one of the things I've been telling people recently, and it's hopefully people will take this to heart, is especially in light of our pandemic and how it's changed the world for everyone, is take the risks. Right? Take the risks. Life is short, and you can learn to become what I call a parachute builder. And what I mean by that is you can jump off the cliff and learn to build a parachute on the way down. Right? And there's nothing like the threat of death when you've jumped off the cliff to learn to build a parachute. Right? And what I mean by that is just there are so many things that, you are going to regret 20 years from now if you said no or if you didn't take the opportunity. And so often we have opportunities looking at us in the face right now, and we let them pass us by because we question ourselves. We question our ability to build, and we question our ability to learn, and we question our ability to have what it takes. And the reality is you're stronger and you are smarter and you are more capable than you give yourself credit for. So to boil it down, take the risk. Right? Because you will regret it later when you look back on it and you didn't take the risk and you didn't do the thing. You didn't step out of your comfort zone and make something happen, because this world needs more people who are giving their value, giving their perspective, and, changing the world. Amen.
I cannot say anything else after the end of that. That was amazing. And I don't see how anybody could not learn anything from our conversation tonight. It's been absolutely wonderful having you on. I definitely thank you for coming on and spending your evening with me. I know that you're with your family and so forth. So again, Richard, thank you so much. I appreciate the time that you spent with us this evening.
You're absolutely welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And of course, before I close tonight's show, we have heard so much about these amazing consulting services that Richard has with his organization. And of course, he has the podcast side. So if you're, like I said, looking to start your own podcast show, you don't have to do the work, but you can do it all for you. You reach out to him about those services. And of course, if you are looking to expand your brand and your business at a whole different level, please reach out and support the businesses that Richard Matthews has. And of course, like I always ask, is that, the listeners, what do you wish existed here for you in 2021? Reach out to me at Kimberly, WSBILC@gmail.com, and let's just have a chat about your goals so we can get you started. Like Richard said earlier, you don't want to leave in this world wondering why I never did the things I wanted to do. So this is a great time to have this conversation. And of course, if you want more WSBI, such as an additional podcast show, or possibly a free virtual live Q&A session with your favorite entrepreneur, we are doing a campaign raising $5,000 so we can provide more of these resources for success. And you can go to www.wsbilc.com and donate whatever amount of money that you would like to support us with. And again, we would like to thank you all for listening to tonight's show. We'll be back next week with more amazing guests. Be sure to follow us on iHeartRadio or download your mobile app on Google Play or wherever you listen to your podcasts. But until then, enjoy the rest of your evening and good night.
Good night, everyone. We will be back next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Follow us on Spreaker, www.spreaker.com/user/WSBI. View our new WSBI website anytime at www.wsbillc.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram.